What do you feel are the most important issues for women?
Well, sadly, I think there are many issues that are facing women today in our society. But just to mention a few of the major ones, a woman can't walk down the street and go shopping or have lunch on her own without a male companion escort with her. She can't buy property. She can't handle her own money. She cannot conduct herself a business on her own. She cannot vote, although if she has independent means, she must pay taxes like the male citizens of our country. And if she's a working woman, she does not get paid equally as men are paid. Of course, that women's suffrage will be something that will help to address some of these, because when women have the right of representation and they can have a voice in what's happening, things like this will change. I also think beyond the vote, however, the most important thing for women is financial independence. Without that financial independence, everything else that women wish to do, it forces her into one of two choices. Either she has to marry in order to sustain herself and then becomes a drudge and has one child after another, or she has to find some other unsavory way in order to put food in her mouth and a roof over her head.
Now, in view of your current campaign for president, many newspapers have charged you with being promiscuous or of low moral character because of your continued stance on free love. They accuse you of wantonly taking frequent lovers and of encouraging other women to do so also. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, since it is a subject of much interest to me, I'd be happy to discuss my views about that. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that I am very happily married to my second husband, Colonel James Blood, and I'm a great proponent and always have been a great proponent of marriage. Unlike the members of the Oneida community in New York who eschew marriage and disdain it and often take different bed partners with them on a daily basis. What I mean by free love is the right to marry, to divorce, to have children, and if you do divorce, to have custody of those children right along with your husband. Any sort of sexual commerce that is founded not on love is little better than prostitution in my estimate. So yes, I am a free lover. I believe it is my inalienable, constitutional, and natural right to love whomever I want, to change that love on a daily basis if I choose, to love for as long or as little a time, and that neither you nor any law that you might frame have any right to interfere with that right.
As the first woman to address a House committee arguing that women already had the right to vote due to the 14th and 15th Amendment, how were you received?
Well, first of all, it was quite an honor to be invited to talk to the House Judiciary Committee. And I was also very fortunate to be prepared for my interview there by the former General Ben Butler, who was also Senator Butler at the moment, and he also was my escort that day. The 14th Amendment defines what citizens are, and citizens of this country, according to the new amendment, they are simply people born in our country or naturalized. The 15th Amendment says citizens shall not have their right to vote abridged, whether it's by color or race or condition of former servitude. It does not define citizen as male or female. It simply says citizen. Therefore, since it does not preclude women as being citizens, I don't have to beg for the privilege of the vote. I'm already granted that right. Most of the men on the Judiciary Committee, I will admit, were very welcoming to my comments. Many of them were very surprised because they hadn't realized that in crafting the 14th Amendment, they had by accident actually given the right to women to vote. Sadly, despite the fact that they were very welcoming and felt that I had a logical, compelling argument, it wasn't compelling enough for them to grant women's suffrage or universal suffrage to everyone.
At this time when women can't vote or enter a restaurant or a store without a man by her side, what statement are you making with your run for president?
Well, first of all, I think almost any reasonable person would agree that it's absolutely ridiculous that a grown woman cannot, go about her daily life and needs to have a chaperone to go shopping or to have lunch out, or to even riding in her carriage, she is supposed to drop the curtains so that people don't look at her while she's traveling down the street. My husband, of course, does escort Tenny and me to many places, but we also remember that we are stockbrokers in New York and we have business to attend to, and we can't always worry about whether or not we have a male escort to walk us down the street. And to show you what ridiculous lengths we've sometimes had to go to, we went for lunch at Delmonico's one day as we were out after visiting some of our clients. And when we sat down, we ordered some soup. And the next thing we knew, the owner was there, and he thought that perhaps we had made a mistake and that we would like to discreetly withdraw. He would make it seem as if we had just been there to ask him a question. Well, Tenny, being her saucy self, went immediately out to the carriage and brought in the carriage driver, seated him at our table, ordered soup for him. And I have to say, it was quite a sight to see him there in his red jacket and his tall top hat having soup with the two of us. But we did fulfill society's requirements. This is the whole point. Women shouldn't have to go to those lengths in order to go about their daily lives. And as my campaign for president, it is the equality party. When men and women have full equality, when women have the rights to vote, when they can take care of themselves financially, we will not have to worry about these things. And this is the world that I want to see, and certainly no woman should be considered of low class simply because she would like to take a shopping expedition with her friend.
Your newspaper gives you a forum for your ideas. Do you feel you are treated unfairly for your published opinions?
It's a labor of love, and we were fortunate enough, because of the money that we made as the first female stockbrokers in New York, to be able to have enough money to be able to indulge this passion, along with the help of my husband, Colonel Blood, and another friend, Stephen Andrews, who is an excellent writer and well known throughout the journalistic world. We have reported on all sorts of things of interest, everything from dress reform to vegetarianism. But the true issue came into play that has created all of the scandal that you're reading about in the news at the moment. It's, of course, when we published the article about the Reverend Henry Beecher and his scandalous affair with his parishioner, Elizabeth Tilton. By the way, she is not, as I mentioned in the article, she is not the only person that he has dallied with. I call him a serial seducer, and there must be at least 20 of his mistresses in church pews every Sunday as he is preaching. I could not stand the hypocrisy of this double standard where a man can stand in the pulpit and preach about women and their morals, but then they can go out on their own and leave their wife at home, and they can go out with the mistress, and everybody turns a blind eye to it. We also just wrote about a infamous mass ball that takes place every year in New York, where married men and men of high standing in our community attend this ball, and young women are brought in for them to debauch. We were perhaps a little too detailed in how we describe some of the things that were going on, but certainly no more detailed than things that you might have read in some Bible verses that talk about some improper behavior. Unfortunately, Anthony Comstock, a postal worker who views himself as God's gardener, and how he's weeding out all the terrible weeds of obscenity from the garden. I really consider him a worm of God's garden. He decided that we gave way too much information and for the public, and so he charged us with obscenity. He actually had someone buy up some of the papers, take them to Connecticut over the state line, deliver them to the mailbox of a mailbox he set up in a fake name, by the way, and then he was accused us of obscenity because these things traveled over a state line. So we were, of course, arrested, and I was arrested immediately before the election and thrown into Ludlow jail along with Tenny and with my husband, Colonel Blood. And so I missed my opportunity to go and vote. But on top of that, I think what really makes me angry, and do I feel that we have been unjustly treated? Yes, because the New York Herald printed almost intact the entire article from the weekly, and yet not one person spoke up about them using the same phraseology we used and called it obscene.
Why do you think Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Stanton, and other leaders no longer support you?
Well, first of all, I would say that that's a mischaracterization. I am very familiar, of course, and know Miss Anthony and Mrs. Stanton quite well. We've worked very closely in the National Women's Suffrage Association over the years. And in fact, after my visit to the Judiciary Committee. Elizabeth called me the new face of the suffrage movement. And I also paid for the Women's Convention in 1872. The real issue comes about with Susan. Susan, I fear, spends too much time believing everything she reads in the newspaper and feeling that anything that does not sit well with her taints the entire movement. She was not happy at all with some of the articles that were written about my family, and I have to admit to a bit of hypocrisy. Penny and I come from a very poor background. I'm from a family of 10 children. My father and my mother alternately praised us, and then they would abuse us. From the time we were small children, we were dragged around, and my father had a medicine show, and we were forced into performing all sorts of things at the medicine show. I only had 3 years of education in my entire life. I am completely self-taught. However, when we finally decided that we were going to leave our family and strike out on our own, we sort of remade ourselves by telling people that we came from a nice middle-class family and we had gone to a girls' finishing school, and our father was a lawyer, which he was, but I use the word loosely. So those articles were already there, and they bothered Susan. What really bothered her the most was the articles about the Reverend Beecher, mainly because Susan was the one who was the gossip who told us about it. She was in the Tilton home when Elizabeth Tilton told her what happened, and she had to literally lock herself in a room with Elizabeth in order to prevent Theodore from practically strangling his wife on the spot. She told Elizabeth Stanton the story, and it ran like wildfire. I think she was embarrassed. She sees me as an opportunist. She and I have parted ways. However, Mrs. Stanton is firmly on my side and remains on my side, and after 24 years of friendship, she and Susan have parted ways. So I would say that while the negative articles in the paper, yes, they did create some issues for me, both in my campaign and in my lecture circuit and everything, all in all, I still remain firmly in that community and have most of the support of that community.
What do you consider your greatest accomplishment so far? If people have to remember one thing about you, what should they remember?
Well, in my life, I have done many things. I have been a journalist. I have been a feminist. I have been an abolitionist. Was the first woman stockbroker. My sister and I should say, we were the first women stockbrokers. But most of all, I think I am proud of the fact that I have championed equal rights for everybody. I didn't just pursue suffrage for women. I pursued suffrage for everyone, for Black people, for American Indians, for women, for immigrants. I felt universal suffrage was a right of everyone. And I pursued that throughout my entire life. I also, never gave up the idea that women, in order to be completely free, needed to be educated and be able to financially support themselves. In my Equal Rights Party, I had people who were laborers. I had American Indians who supported me. I had Black people. Frederick Douglass was my vice president nominee. So I think the fact that I spent my life really trying to bridge the breach between the suffrage group that happened when the 14th and 15th Amendments came about, and spent my whole life trying to continue to push for women having complete equality with men. And that is what I would most like to be remembered for.